Hey, it's Alex with It's Sensitive. Today we have Brian G.
What's up? What's up?
And we're going to be talking about mental health, similar to last, not week, a couple weeks ago now. And Brian G and I know each other from high school, actually. So that will be a fun conversation. But we'll touch on mental health, addiction, and family a little bit. But before we get started with that, I just had ice cream for breakfast this past Saturday because it's National Ice Cream for Breakfast Day. So what's your favorite ice cream?
I would have to say I like the cookie brownie mix, anything cookie brownie mix, but I don't know that I could do it for breakfast. That's interesting. I didn't know there even was a National Ice Cream for Breakfast Day.
Well, now you know.
I'll have to remember that. Maybe I'll celebrate it next year.
In February, right?
In February.
It seems counterintuitive a little bit.
Yeah.
So, funny story about knowing each other from high school. Brian and I actually were in this similar program called Junior ROTC. And we ended up being on the drill team together and did an armed exhibition duet.
We've done several of them.
Yeah. And the other way we also knew each other is me and my brother don't have the same last name and don't look like. And Brian didn't know that my brother was related to me.
Yeah, it was the house party that I was invited to, and I showed up and seen Alex there, and I'm like, oh shit, you're at the same party? That's awesome. She's like, I live here. And I'm like, whoa, I did not know that. And ever since then, we just kind of became friends.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So I promised somebody I'd tell this story before we get into the deep, It's Sensitive stuff. But during one of our duets, which for those of you who don't know, is us spinning around 9-pound M1 Garand old school World War II rifles. They're heavy.
Super heavy.
And we were doing super cool like movements and spinning the rifle. And I was kneeling on the ground and you were standing right above me spinning that rifle.
Yep. And I spun it, I think it was helicopter, and I was coming back around to swing it to my side. I smacked you right in the head with it.
Yeah, literally, when you think about it, think about a bobblehead. My head just went left and right bobbling. And I kept spinning the rifle and we kept going. And part of the military drill is that you keep your bearing. We still got second place.
Yeah, and if I remember right, there was no blood drawn.
No, just that hurt like a bitch.
That was a good time.
Hell yeah. So the funny thing is, we were talking about high school, and both of us have been on our own journeys over the last several years. We're in our 30s now. I think we're both in our 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've definitely watched each other grow a lot over this last several years.
Grow and go through hell. Grow through hell, basically, I would say.
Yeah. Grow through hell is accurate. And we're here to normalize that a little bit today. We'll be talking about a lot of different stuff. It's going to be a little bit tough, but we're going to normalize it. So the first thing talking about our journeys is I'll kind of open up a little bit about mine and let Brian get into what he's went through with alcoholism and addiction and how that's related to mental health. And for me, I was more on the end of the spectrum where I was binge eating a lot as a way to cope with depression, anxiety, being sad. And binge eating, for those of you that don't know, is like eating a lot of food until you feel like super full or, just way too much because it makes you feel better. You get that oxytocin and that dopamine from overeating, but there's other things that do that too.
And that's where alcohol and drugs and things of that nature come into play. I've always been kind of experimental since even before I was even in high school. I think I got my first bottle of vodka in 8th grade from one of my friends. He stole it from his mom, and I bought it from him in class. And so that's kind of where it started. Now, granted, when I was younger, I'd say about like 3 years old, that's when I had my first rum runner. So alcohol has always just kind of been present in my life. And then, going on turning 15 and up, then my parents started letting me drink on New Year's. And then from there, going to 18, I was hanging out with people that were already, at the end of their 20s into their 30s. and they were teaching me how to drink. And when I say teaching me how to drink, I mean like hard liquor. I'm not talking just, casual drinking beer on a Saturday. I'm talking about partying almost every night and drinking hard liquor, that anything above 92 proof. If it was under that, we weren't drinking it. And this is when I was 18. So,
Yeah, that's pretty tough, man. The irony is my mom offered to let me drink at a pretty young age because it's very common in European culture. But like I never had the desire to because it's always on the table. The same with drugs even. She's like, if you want to do drugs, just try it at home and be safe about it.
which is funny because your mom was my mom, and I actually did drink and smoke with her a lot. So,
funny how that happens, right?
right.
But yeah, like when would you say like the alcoholism just kind of kicked in for you? Like when it was really more of a problem as opposed to just drinking casually?
A problem, I would say I was getting into being about 26, about 2016, 2017, I would say is when it started. I was going through a lot of rocky relationships, both like, in a relationship with my son's mom at the time, and then just also the friendships that I was involved in. It got to that point where the drinking just felt really good. I mean, let's stem back. I remember my first Irish car bomb. I was 18, and I had one of my best friends made an Irish car bomb for me, and she said, make sure you drink that thing all the way down, because if you stop halfway through, you will throw up. So I chugged that thing all the way down. And I was 18, chugged that thing all the way down. And then from my lips all the way down to my toes went numb. And when I say went numb, I mean in a great way, like the greatest feeling ever. From there on, I knew, I was like, this is the feeling I want right here. So, going back forward, 2017, 2016 was when I was starting to get to the point to where I was drinking hard liquor every day. I wasn't much of a beer drinker, drank a lot of hard liquor. So I drank, that almost every day. And then it got to the point to going into like 2018, 2019, it became daily. And
how old were you then?
2018, I was 25, 26, somewhere around there. So, I mean, this wasn't, this is like good 5 years ago. My alcohol problem has been stemming since about 2011. So that's when it first started coming up. I started drinking back in 2011 and was steady since 2011 up until last year. So yeah, I mean, that it was something that was just there. It was easy to get my hands on, and it's not something you have to wait for. You can just go to the liquor store, gas station, anywhere you go. It's readily available. So it was just easy. No matter what it was, I could get my hands on it and, just get that feeling to go away as soon as possible.
It's interesting you say that because I'm thinking about my own journey with overeating, and I've been overweight my whole life, like since high school. You knew me back then. And it's kind of strange now that I'm thinking about this, because I feel like people don't talk about overeating or undereating or eating in general being like an addiction. But I feel like alcoholism is more visible in the addiction field, like ways to get help. And it wasn't until I started getting mental health help or weight loss help that we started talking about eating being not an addiction per se, but it being like the driver behind or a coping mechanism for my mental health.
Exactly.
And it sounds like alcohol was like a coping mechanism potentially for you as you were going through a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the thing too is alcohol wasn't the start. I mean, so back when I was in high school, I think it was my freshman year, I started taking Adderall. That was for fun. I wasn't prescribed it. It was for fun. Sophomore year, junior year, I started kind of experimenting with Vicodin. And then going into my senior year, started experimenting with Xanax. But in the midst of all that too, by the time I was 16, I think I, was more of a pothead than anything. I smoked weed religiously. And that's what I always thought I was going to do. I always thought that weed was for me. Like, that's it. Like, I didn't need anything else. And then, I got hit with the charges back in 2010 when I was in a whole different life. That's something we can touch on too, if you want to. But, But yeah, I was in a whole different life. And so then after I got out of that, I quit smoking and um, I quit smoking and I quit doing everything. I was on probation for a year and a half. Um, so I got off everything. I wasn't on anything. And then by the time that year and a half of probation was up, I felt free again. And I was like, okay, well, I'm free. So first thing I did was started smoking weed. And then after that, started drinking alcohol. So it all stems. I mean, there's a stem. I don't really like to consider anything being a gateway because I started with pills and I dropped the pills for weed. And then I stopped smoking weed and went to alcohol. I don't consider it a gateway. I just more consider it, finding the thing that feels the best at that time.
I think that's a good call out because I've talked to people about marijuana being still a tool for addiction because I hear a lot of people, unfortunately, including my brother, say, oh, marijuana is not addictive. But I'm like, anything can be addictive if you have an addictive personality or a reason to be
Correct.
addicted.
Correct. Absolutely. I mean, marijuana absolutely does have an addiction, mechanism to it that may not be registered the same way as what other addictions are, but it's no different than like, say, smoking cigarettes. Somebody that's addicted to nicotine. You're addicted to nicotine. You're the same way that you could be addicted to THC. You crave that high. It's an addiction. You're going without a cigarette, then what's going to happen to your mood? You're just going to be all over the place until you have your nicotine. Same thing happens with people with weed. You're all over the place until you get your THC and it calms you down. It's an addiction.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree. And I feel that way about eating sometimes too. I'm much better now than I used to be, but like I remember being younger. I think we all joke because Snickers made it popular, but the term hangry,
Yeah.
hangry can sometimes be more of a issue of like mental health and less because of physical hunger.
Right.
And I say that because I've went through being hangry more out of mental health. Like I am so starving or I wait so long between eating because I'm so stressed out that like my eating habits are erratic and then I binge eat and I eat so much until I just feel sick or until I'm just so full or I get to the point that I'm hangry because I'm just not properly taking care of myself. And for me, a lot of that stemmed from like depression. And I was unfortunately in denial that I was in depression because I talked about this on the not topic, but podcast with Lauren about it's hard to talk about, but I went through counseling in high school because my teachers saw me self-harming and they referred me to a service to see a counselor. And I went through counseling for like 4 years pretty regularly. And I remember standing on a stage telling them that, oh yeah, I was able to, manage depression without medication. And that was a big deal for me. And then I graduated high school and I'm like, oh, I'm an adult now. I can control my life. And that wasn't the reality. Like depression was still absolutely a problem. So I think it's important to like recognize like also denying mental health problems it is a problem sometimes too.
I see it as the same way as, somebody that's wanting to get off of substances, you have to want it. And so it's the same with your mental health. You have to want to get right with yourself. I mean, there's a very easy way of getting kind of succumbed into the mental side where it's dark and it's scary and it shuts you down and you just want to lay in bed and all you're doing is wasting away the days, the weeks, months, and it goes by. And it's because one, you don't know what to do or how to go about it. But two, you don't necessarily want to do anything. And that's a problem in your mind. So that's where it's like you have to want it for yourself the same way that you have to, want to get off of, drugs.
Absolutely. So it makes me curious because my like transformation came just recently as well. Like I was living in like this disassociated state regarding depression and overeating for so long. And even though I tried to lose weight using fad diets and things like that, like none of that really stuck for long term because I didn't address the underlying issue. I'm curious for you, you know, I talked about in episode 1 that the catalyst for me was I just got to a fuck it moment where I was like, I was tired of trying every single weight loss drug. And then finally my doctors convinced me to try mental health therapy. And I was like, I don't need that. Like, that's bullshit. But what kind of changed for you that caused you to go through your transformation?
Um, so one of my biggest problems that I face with my mental challenges is that I have a tendency to be reckless. I have reckless tendencies that can basically mimic suicidal tendencies, but the only difference is that I'm not, suicidal to the point where it's like I'm gonna kill myself. What it is with reckless tendencies is that you will go and do something extremely dangerous knowing that the outcome could possibly be death. And so for me, that could be, going and driving 110 on the freeway with my eyes closed. That could be, going out in the middle of the woods with not enough resources and getting myself completely lost and just, trying to figure out what's next. I have reckless tendencies to where I just like to kind of act on life and let life take its terms. So my biggest thing with the reckless tendencies that happened was last year, um, in June, my mental health was just at its lowest. I went through just the complete lowest of the low with my mental health, with my alcohol addiction. And basically, one weekend, I was out driving, drinking and driving in my truck. Um, I actually wrecked my truck. I won't go into too many details about that, but I actually did wreck my truck. It was a one person accident. There was nobody else involved. It was just me. So yeah, there was no injuries, even myself, but nobody was involved besides me. But I wrecked my truck and about killed myself. Very next day on Sunday, I went out on my motorcycle, did the same thing, was drinking and driving. And I ended up almost killing myself on my motorcycle. It took 4 or 5 different people to get a hold of me, to find me, to figure out even where I was, to get my ass home. So that way I didn't kill myself on my motorcycle. And it was just that Monday I woke up and I was completely hungover, but I went through mental anguish knowing what I had just did that weekend and how I almost died on my truck Saturday and almost died on my motorcycle on Sunday. And on Monday, I woke up and said, something's got to give. I can't keep doing this because it's just going to be grief for somebody else, anybody else. My mom, the most, who, I don't want her having to bury her son, just had to bury her husband. But, I found out that I needed to stop. I needed to stop with the alcohol. And so I took my advice and I made my own, phone calls, reached out to several different facilities to detox, but I did it to where it wasn't in Ohio. I couldn't be here in Ohio when I detoxed because I was already around everything negative in my life. So that's
Yeah.
about when I found out, about June of last year with everything that I was doing and how reckless I had became and just how involved. So to put it into perspective as well, I was off the deep end with the alcohol. I was drinking about a 24 pack of Coors Light a day, along with a
Holy
bottle of
crap.
whiskey a day.
That's
That was
crazy.
a day. So yeah, that's how far off the deep end it was. And that's not including, trips to the bars and stuff
Right.
like that. I don't know how many drinks those were, shots, beers, but when I got home, easily a 24 pack and a bottle of whiskey.
I don't know how you
So,
weren't shitting yourself, dude. Like,
well, I don't know either, but I can also tell you, just another little fun thing. So I actually had a bottle of absinthe imported from Germany, and it's like 139 proof. It's called Hamlet Hardcore Black, and it literally says on the bottle, "Do not take as a shot." It's considered the shot of death, and I took 2 shots of that shit,
oh my God.
2 separate nights. So I've taken 4 shots of it, 2 shots each on 2 different nights, and I don't know how I woke up the next day, to be honest with you. So
Man, you're lucky to not be dead, dude.
several times over. And that's where, I kind of look at that as, God gave me not just my second chance, but my third, fourth, fifth. And then honestly, I have had a very, very, very rocky relationship with my dad. But honestly, after he passed away, I feel that he has been looking over me. And he's the only reason also why I'm not dead right now is because of all the reckless and stupid shit I've been doing. I think he's also been kind of keeping one hand on me at the same time.
Yeah, it, well, first of all, your proverbial fuck it moment came, like, I don't know, like a year after mine, but like that transformation was about the same because I felt like my transformation really started in May of 23, which was in yours was June of 23. And we are two very different people. And we're on this like similar path together in very different ways. And a couple of things I noted during that was you had people you cared about and people who cared about you who helped like bring you back to reality. When it comes to mental health, like what for you, like really kind of honed in, like that support network for you, like what really like rang those bells for you?
What do you mean exactly? Like, my biggest support system's really just been my mom. She's been the
Yeah.
one that's kind of kicked my ass into gear to get me to get the ideas flowing, I would say, because it's like I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do something. She throws the idea out there and then I can run with it. As long as it gets thrown out, then I can run with it. So she's just kind of like that guiding light and where I go next or how I do something next, I guess.
Yeah.
She's always been there for me in that sense. So she's really been like the one biggest support because over time, it's like I had to do everything for myself and I've had to want everything for myself. I've cut off all my old friends that I did, things with that that caused my life problems. So yeah, it's just that support system of mine is very, very small.
It that's super helpful because I think everybody has a person in their life that can be a guiding light and they might not always be the same person, but I think, for me, like friends have been a big crux for that to like keep me going. Like Cass was in my first episode as my co-host, but there have been times like we have had to lean on each other, which is why we talked about weight together, is because we've been through a lot together. And there were times like I didn't want to be here anymore, even as a grown ass adult. And similar to what you were saying is like you didn't necessarily like go like I'm going to go off and kill myself, but that reckless behavior. I've done very stupid things too where I'm just like speeding and weaving in and out of traffic just because I can't control my anger.
Yep.
And I just have all these feelings I don't know what to do with.
That's that tunnel vision.
Yeah. And sometimes your friends just bring you back down to reality or like recenter you or refocus you, or in your case, your mom help kind of kind of give you that proverbial
Right.
face slap, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, because my problem is that I literally have a mass appeal with, the street life and people of that nature where it's just, I'm infatuated by it with, and not necessarily, I want to get involved in it, but I like the things that are involved in the streets, like the different things that people do that aren't necessarily law abiding. Things like that just infatuate me. And I find it, interesting to say the least.
Yeah, I could imagine.
Yeah, I find it interesting to say the least. So I tend to find myself with bad friends. And that's where it's like I have to kind of retrain myself into getting with the right groups of people. And that's exactly what I've been doing this year's. I've been networking and changing my whole friend group up anyway. So,
I think you hit the nail on the head right there, because one of the big things that I've noticed with my transformation in my mental health is that I've had to lean on my friends in a very different way. I've had to open up emotionally to them when I haven't before. I thought I was emotional because I'm vulnerable sometimes with people. But something I tell my therapist a lot is I can be vulnerable without having my emotions behind it.
Yeah.
I can be very disconnected. And I didn't share my my innermost feelings with my close friends, and I've had to lean on them over this last year to like have them help me like to open up, and our relationships have changed drastically, and my friends could have easily walked away.
Yeah.
And thankfully I have a really good core group of friends who stuck around and are the right people for me. But for you, like that looked different, that you had to find entirely different friends that were in completely different groups.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just with the people that I was around, I mean, they've always been into doing drugs and into, doing outlaw shit. I mean, I've got friends from all over different places. I'm not trying to talk about any of them. So, But yeah, I mean, I've got to get myself to where it's like I have a better network of people, and I'm actually working on just building like a solid team of just people that I know I can rely on, as well as to touch on the honesty thing. That is one thing I've always been very closed off. I don't like to socialize with people about my problems. I don't like to talk about myself and the nature of what's wrong with me, what's going on with me. That is something that, going through the changes that I have has been one thing that I've been focusing on, is being honest and being upfront and, completely open with people about what is going on with me, because figuring it out, bottling it up, that shit hurts so much more than just letting it out.
It's interesting. We talked a little bit before we started about mental health, and we've mentioned anxiety and depression and PTSD a little bit. But I found it interesting. You said you took Adderall in high school recreationally, but you recently told me that you were diagnosed with ADHD formally. Are you feeling like in your current mental health state, like that some of these diagnoses are helping understand yourself a little bit?
They definitely get me to where I understand what's going on with me. I don't understand myself, no. I don't understand what triggers certain things to happen and when and why. That's something I'm still learning to figure out, but what I'm actually currently trying to do is figure out how to embrace it and how to shake it off. So, for example, when I get like really bad spouts of anxiety, I challenge it. I get myself to the point to where I challenge it, because anxiety is two things. It's fight or flight. And my whole life, with the way that I was treated growing up, I had, a lot of trauma from my childhood, a lot of, abuse, physical abuse. So my thing was not ever fight. I was never fighting back. It's always been flight. So when my anxiety kicks in, it's always flight. I always have to flee the scene. I always have to get away from whatever is causing me anxiety. Here lately, I've been embracing it and challenging it. So it's like I basically am telling my anxiety, "Oh, you want some? All right, let's do this. Let's see how it goes. Let's tussle. Let's go ahead and fight each other now."
Yeah.
And what it is, when you don't want something to be there, it's going to be there, and it's going to be a pest, and it's going to be a pain in your ass for as long as it can, because it knows you don't want it to be there. But if you take that anxiety and you sit there and you're like, "Oh, okay, I do want this to be here. Yeah, let's play with this. Let's see what it's doing." And then eventually you're retraining your brain to kind of alleviate that, cause of anxiety and, where it stems from.
So I'm glad you brought up PTSD, because post-traumatic stress disorder can present itself in a lot of different ways. And I think when most people think PTSD, they think about the military, especially post-Afghanistan, Iraq war, and think about people who have been through physically traumatic experiences. But mentally traumatic experiences are paired to PTSD, even with the military. But even outside the military, it can present itself in ways similar to what you just said, that fight or flight.
Yes.
And I was giggling a little bit because you said your tendency was for flight. And I when I've started paying attention to my internal cues, mine was fight.
Yeah.
My fists would ball up. My body would get tense.
Yeah.
I would want to throw somebody against a wall.
Yeah.
And
see, I was that guy that was getting thrown against the wall. That's why mine is flight.
To be clear, I did not throw him against the wall.
No, I'm not even talking about Alex. I'm talking about my childhood stuff. So
yeah, no. Well, you did hit me in the head with a rifle, so you were fight then.
All right, are you like asking for redemption? Like, do you want a free shot or something?
But yeah, so like with that PTSD, fight or flight, I didn't notice it until my therapist started me to like asking me to pay attention to my internal self.
Yeah.
And I was always so worried about my external self and what other people perceive me as I wasn't giving a shit about myself and loving myself enough to even care about how I was feeling internally. And so I'm a helper. If you know me, I've probably said a couple of times, I'm a semi-professional volunteer. And that means sometimes I give too much at the expense of myself.
Exactly.
And you were saying things about reckless. I've physically been reckless, but I've also been reckless in overextending myself. I once went on the same year that my mom had 2 open heart surgeries and she had a 50% chance to live, which was extremely mentally stressful. I went on 2 disaster deployments to Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Harvey within like a week of each other.
Wow.
And I was so mentally spent. And I ended up having to take a mental health leave from work the year after. And I was still in denial that I had issues with depression or PTSD or anxiety. I didn't know why I was having problems because I wasn't listening to my internal self.
That's where it's similar to addiction, because it's addiction, you know, you don't want to admit that you have a problem.
Absolutely. And I think, when we touch about mental health, I think the important part here is like that monitoring your internal self and your internal world and how you're feeling is so important as like the external things you're doing, whether that's drinking or smoking or overeating. And I think that's where things get difficult, right? Because like sometimes that's hard to sort out on your own, is like what your internal world is telling you.
So, kind of touch on that now. Being 18, when I truly started drinking, that's when it started, was 18, adulthood. That's when you turn to adult. So from 18 until last July, I have been drinking my whole entire adult life. There has been no time that I have taken, I would say, more than a month off of substances and been sober. So yeah, I mean, it's just that whole thing. I'm trying to relearn what adulthood is like now outside of alcohol abuse and substance abuse. And it's a very challenging thing to try to relearn who you are as a person and try to relearn, just all of life and how to cope and how to handle things, especially after all the trauma you've been through and all the, mental health disorders that you go through. It gets to that point to where you don't have anything to cope besides yourself. And a lot of the times it comes in very intrusive thoughts, and those thoughts they eat away at you. But you have to find that balance, and you have to find a way to fight those thoughts back, keep yourself preoccupied. And I consider myself a well-oiled machine. I don't stop. I sleep probably 2-3 hours a night if I'm lucky. And then I can wake up again 7-8 o'clock in the morning the next day, full energy, ready to go back at it again. That's just how I've kind of been functioning, trying to, relearn how to not, drink. Because that's like, I can't tell you how many times I don't mentally crave the alcohol. I don't have it in my head where it's like, I want to have a drink. But I think that my body still physically craves it, and it doesn't know what's going on, and it doesn't understand why suddenly this was taken away, because we're talking 13 years of abuse. Yeah. I'm only 6 months off of alcohol. That's, that 6 months seems more like 6 days to me. That's what it feels like, is like more like 6 days. So it's like trying to, just relearn everything, trying to tackle things, and then go home at the end of the day and not be like, all right, I'm ready for a beer now. The whole thing, it's very agonizing sometimes, and it can really eat at you, but you have to find that balance to stop it from eating.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that, because one of the things that we touched on too earlier is that you've always been a pretty small guy all your life. Yeah. And you were talking about how that's a sensitive issue for you because you have problems gaining weight. And, I think we mentioned earlier, one off the podcast, that part of that was the alcoholism, but, you're retraining your physical body to do something different, and you have your own internal physical narrative versus mental narrative of what's going on. And that's similar to fight or flight. Yeah. Is your body's physically doing something that you're trying to retrain after all these years.
Yeah. And I mean, also to kind of add to, some of the stuff we were talking about with like the eating disorders, after I got off the alcohol, I think for a good 2-3 months that I wasn't drinking, I literally replaced the alcohol with food. That was my coping mechanism, and that's what I used to feel better. And I mean, it wasn't good food. It was junk food. It was shit. It was like brownies and, just stuff like that. But it was my coping mechanism. I was going through and using food as my outlet since I wasn't drinking anymore. So that went on for like a good, few months. And then after that, I started trying to do psychiatry. So now it's like I'm trying different medications, which I absolutely hate. I absolutely hate it
Yes.
so much. The trial and error of it is, it's the absolute worst. I've also been put in a position where I've had too many things prescribed at once. I've had too many dosages upped at once. And a couple months back, I ended up developing early signs of serotonin syndrome, and I was getting manic episodes. And so I ended up having to quit taking Zoloft cold turkey. So I was going through withdrawals again from another substance. I'm getting like the brain zaps, which I still get every now and again. But yeah, so it's like I'm going through like the withdrawals from Zoloft now. So it's like, you go through withdrawal after withdrawal, just trying to fight off all these things that you ended up putting on yourself over the years. So yeah, I mean, it sucks. The trial and error definitely sucks. It's one thing I can't stand, and that's one thing that I have a problem still admitting, is that like I need to be on medication. There's got to be something out there that can calm this down and make it easier for me. But I'm not in denial that I need medication. I just personally don't like being put on medication.
Yeah, and I think you and I are similar. Like, I'm not a fan of being on medication either. That's how I kind of reached my fuck it moment, is I refused to be on mental health drugs.
Yeah.
And I said in episode 1 about the weight loss that part of it was initially because of the military, but I just like programmed myself, like, I can handle this without medication. But I think something my therapist said that was super helpful was sometimes our brains just need a little bit of help. And thinking about it in the sense of it's not there to make, like, there's no medication, and you could probably attest to this, that is a magic bullet that just makes mental health better.
Not at all.
It's mental health work. If you have medication, is doing the work on yourself mentally, whether that's with a therapist, a psychiatrist, whatever, and medication's there to help you. And then there's also naturally that level of trial and error of finding what's right for you. And I think a lot of people get frustrated with that because that trial and error is fucking shitty.
Yeah.
You feel shitty. It's not fun. There's side effects, and you're like, what the fuck is the point? I don't feel better. I feel worse.
Right. And I mean, for me, like, my problem too is that like my brain doesn't shut off. It literally goes on forever. And I mean, to attest to that, like, I literally just got this put on my arm. It is a knife going through a brain, and it says stop thinking. That is like my straight up a testament to me, because my brain does not stop thinking, and I literally want to put a knife through it. Not in a suicidal way. I'll put that out there, but right. It's like I want my brain to just stop. But it's like I don't have the ability to shut off my brain. My brain can literally wake me up in the middle of the night because I have a thought that's going on, and suddenly I have to wake up and think about it. Like, I have to be awake to think about it the proper way. Yeah, so it's just, you kind of end up in a position where your brain doesn't stop, and then you just kind of are hardwired to keep going. And that medication thing, I do research and everything, and it's like all I see are the side effects, the possible issues of taking this drug, what you can't mix it with, this and that in itself makes me paranoid. That fucks with my panic disorder. So it's like, here I go doing the research into this stuff. But then there's one thing that I am curious about that, like, I wouldn't mind trying to see about, and it's all natural. And that's like, I've been learning a lot more about how people have been microdosing psilocybin here recently, and how when you take it in a microdose, you do it for 2 weeks at a time, every other day, and then you take a week off. So that way you're not building up a tolerance. You're not, abusing it. You're not getting to that threshold of crossing the line of hallucinating. It's literally meant for mental health. And so from some of the studies that I've been seeing and reading about people, attesting to the use of psilocybin in microdoses, they say that it's, kind of rewired their brain, restarted it. So yeah, you don't necessarily have like an end all for mental health, but you have a way to reset it possibly. And that's something that I would dabble in the sense that obviously it would help my mental health. I wouldn't, want to try to do mushrooms to hallucinate or anything. At this point, like, all it is for me is focusing on myself, what's ahead of me, and doing things the right way. So whenever I talk about anything like that, it's all in the sake of, this is what I've done research on, this is how it has benefits, and this is what it can do for you. Not, oh, hey, let's go look at unicorns and go have a blast. So
Yeah, no, I think that's a good call out because I've seen a lot of things about ketamine trials as well and used in the mental health context by counselors and things like that. Well, certified folks.
Right.
But there's still a lot to learn about the mind, and there's no surefire way to figure things out and fix things, right? And I think that's why it's important to normalize some of these conversations, is because you're not going to really know or realize what's going to be helpful for you unless you learn and understand
Yep.
and maybe experience things, whether it's personally or with other people.
I was gonna say, to add to that, just to add to that, talking about, like the ketamine and microdosing psilocybin and stuff. I just want to say, always do that under supervision. Don't ever
Absolutely.
do that alone, and always make sure that you have somebody that's very well aware of when you're doing it, so that way they can monitor you and keep an eye on you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the thing with all of these, even the prescription medications, is I've heard of people who self-medicate in the sense they up or down their dose without talking to a professional, and that can be detrimental. A little bit I'm going through is I have side effects from birth control with mental health, like irritability, and I'm talking to different doctors and also taking bupropion, which is brand name Wellbutrin. And when I got up to the 300 dose just recently, several months ago, I started noticing that I just had intrusive suicidal thoughts. Like I had no intention of wanting to kill myself, but all of a sudden in my head, I just had these intrusive thoughts: stick a gun to your head. Yeah, the crazy thing is, I had no desire to actually kill myself. My life has been really good, but the medication caused me to have these intrusive thoughts. And had I not been actively working with my doctors on medication changes and my therapist to talk about how I was feeling, like I would not have caught that it might have been related to the medication.
Yes.
And I had to be brave enough to I told two people at the time when I was having those thoughts. Cass, who was on the first episode, because she's my close best friend, and my therapist. And I even doubted telling my therapist because I didn't want my therapist to think I was fucking crazy.
Hold them down.
Committer.
That's the thing, and that's the reason why a lot of people don't like the whole, admitting the suicidal thoughts thing, is because they're afraid they're going to be thrown in a insane asylum, and that's not necessarily the case.
Just for reference, I was not thrown in an insane asylum.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's not necessarily the case when it comes to being honest and telling, like, your therapist and people these things. They're not going to, call up a psych ward and have somebody come book you into the crazy house. Like, that's not how it goes. Mental health, very well, like you said, it's not like you actively were going to go and put a gun to your head. It's just an intrusive thought. It's something that happened due to medication. So obviously they know you in your right mind aren't going to do that. We just need to monitor her while, this is happening. So that way we can make sure that something doesn't happen. And, very real, rest in peace to Matthew Perry. The biggest thing with him and that whole ketamine thing, ketamine is something that he was monitored, but he chose to go and get it in a sense where he was not being monitored. And so that's why I very strong on the be monitored, do things being monitored. If it's not working for you, you have to be very clear about that to your doctor and make the changes that you need. And that's what I've had to do so far with my psychiatrist. And I have been put on several different medications now, and it's like I'm willing to do it because I'm not going to try to find something that could work for me, but I'm going to go to the streets to get it instead. So always be under supervision when you're doing something with any kind of medication, but especially with mental health medication, because it can become very lethal very fast in your own world. It will turn you upside down.
Absolutely. I think that's a great call out because I think it's easy when you're being professionally medicated to just say a little bit more, a little bit less isn't a big deal. But internally monitoring yourself all the time is hard. I can't tell you how many times I've told my therapist, like, how the fuck do I manage changing my mentality, fixing PTSD, managing how I'm feeling on medication, and being a fucking human being, an adult, like at a job and doing everyday things? And she's like, sometimes she's like, I don't know. Not because she's being a dick or something,
Right.
but, but the reality is, like, sometimes you just fucking need help. And sometimes you have to lean on others people. Like, none of us are going through life by ourselves. As much as we love to be loners, like, I've been that person. I was that person for a long time. Like, I got this shit. I can do it by myself. Pull your fucking self up by the bootstraps, because we were all taught that. that's not how life really works.
Yeah.
Like, we have to lean into other people to like go through life. And one of the big things I've learned from these PTSD books is the more and more that there's being research done on PTSD and things like emotional neglect, which do affect mental health a lot. You were referring to like the extreme behaviors like driving and things like that. Some of that's driven by emotional neglect that I've learned from these books. Is that community is so important. And that community can be anything. That can be church, that can be your friends, that can be the gym, that can be your colleagues. But you have to find like your people who are your support network to like lean into when things aren't going well. Like those people you can lean into when things are going well, but also lean into when like things aren't going well and like trust them to like be there for you.
And if you're like me and you don't have necessarily like the support group, as we were talking about earlier, how I've developed like an unhealthy habit of making friends, there's always hotlines available. I have utilized them. You know, some people don't like to admit to that. They don't like to, you know, think about having to call a hotline, but I have definitely called hotlines for my mental health just to speak to somebody, you know, and those people on the other end, they are very, very receiving of what's going on with you. They're very, you know, helpful, and they're very kind. I didn't call, it's not a suicidal hotline, but it was a mental health hotline. I was, you know, just in a very deep mental state where I felt like I was losing control. And this lady that I talked to on one of the calls that I made, it was almost like I was talking to somebody I knew my whole life. So if you don't have an outlet and you don't have the friends that you can rely on, call the hotline. Don't be ashamed to.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you saying that, as I've never really had to lean into that too much myself personally. But, you know, I think that's a good call out, because recently I was having a really, really bad week and my therapist wasn't available. And my university at the age of 33 had a service where you could just like chat with someone, because I needed something real time, because I was having PTSD response and all the normal shit wasn't working. And she just did like an awareness exercise with me. I didn't have to tell her my whole life story. I didn't have to tell her shit. But she's like, you know, notice 5 things in the rooms, you know, touch 4 things, like just bringing yourself back to like that mindfulness in that moment is so helpful. And sometimes you need somebody to guide you through that. And, you know, kind of going back to the PTSD stuff is like, you can have like bodily reactions to stuff, and maybe it's not full-blown PTSD. There's people who have full-blown PTSD and diagnosed with it, but you can still have bad reactions that you need help with like every day, and you not have like a chronic disorder, right? But those same things still help, whether it's an acute one-time thing that you're overwhelmed and you can't handle it, or if it's like an everyday thing, like my entire life revolves around this.
So your PTSD, how does your PTSD come out?
So for me, like, I internally start like feeling like I'm in danger. And so usually when we started like figuring out what my triggers were, they were like really weird things. Like like somebody walking behind me in a hallway, and I would feel like they're following me, and I'd be in like work where it's normal for somebody to walk behind you. But like my fucking biceps would tense up, my fists would tense up. I would like want to turn around, and this random person I don't know want to go fucking slam them against the wall and tell them to stop following me. And I knew it was illogical and made no sense, but like that internal anger was so fucking real that I was in danger that I there were a couple times I debated doing this to some random fucking stranger in a hallway.
And so your PTSD comes out in a physical sense.
Yes.
So my PTSD comes out in like the mental sense. So what it is for me is I get intrusive thoughts, and those intrusive thoughts are things of my past. I constantly think of, you know, things of my past, things that happened to me, things my dad did to me, things that, you know, just anything. And what it is it basically prevents me from being able to think about anything else, from being able to see anything else. And it's almost like my ADHD, I guess, kind of combats it too, because those intrusive thoughts, I mean, it sticks and it rolls and it rolls, and it's like I can't stop them. I can sit there and try and think about other things, or I can listen to music and sit there and like think about the lyrics to the song. But then it's like 30 seconds later, I will find myself drawn back, being super quiet and just thinking about those intrusive thoughts in my head. And it basically paralyzes me. It makes me just sit there and just stare at one thing. And I'm like, I can't do anything.
Out.
Yeah. So checked out, because it's like, damn, like I went through that. And one of the biggest things too, that, kind of messes with me a lot, which I'm still trying to figure out how to fix, I guess, is the childhood trauma that I went through with my dad and the way that I grew up with him. He passed away in 2021, and after everything in my life that he put me through, it was like he was able to just pass away within 5 minutes and just be gone and, leave it all behind. And now I have to live with all of this stuff, and I have no closure from him whatsoever. And I'll never be able to get closure from him. So that's something that eats away at me a lot too, as far as like my PTSD goes, is just thinking about the fact that I'll never have closure from my dad for why he treated me the way he did and why we grew up the way we did. And, just the shit we went through. It was like he was just able to, cause us all this hell and then fucking leave without a trace, basically. So that stuff really hits me a lot.
It's interesting you say that, because I touched on it earlier, that childhood emotional neglect, and I've been learning more about it through books. There's a couple books that I read, and I think I mentioned this in the It's Hard to Talk About podcast with Lauren, but I'll put links in the episode content. But Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents really cover a lot of how parents not handling their emotions really well end up kind of impacting their children, and how we handle certain situations. Running on Empty is another one that's specific about childhood emotional neglect, and it's very in depth, and it talks about different ways that people handle that emotional neglect. For anybody not familiar, there's attachment theory that, children and human beings have attachment types. And if you're not securely attached, it comes out in different ways, like avoidant attachment, anxious attachment. I'm not a psychologist. There's plenty of books and content out on it. But what a lot of these books talk about is, if your parents aren't presenting these attachment styles, helping you as a child to learn how to deal with emotions, this emotional neglect, this childhood emotional neglect, affects how we interpret our worlds, and our internal worlds get fucked up, for lack of a better term. And then we have to learn as an adult how to fucking process everything. And we're like, what's fucking wrong with me?
Oh, I have huge self-esteem issues because of my dad and just the way that he made me feel growing up. It's like, when I was a little kid, he always would call me girl names. My dad would call me girl names. He would literally call me like Brenda and shit like that. And like, anytime I would do something, he basically would tell me that if I wanted to do that, I would never amount to anything in life. So it's like my dad shot down anything and everything that I ever loved growing up. So it's like I have huge self-esteem issues even to this day, where it's like I feel like what I'm doing isn't right, or what I'm doing isn't good enough, or what I'm doing, I don't belong here. Like, these people don't approve of me. Like, I just don't feel like I fit in anywhere, because my dad literally destroyed my whole self-image of myself. So,
I feel that in a couple of senses, both with my weight and also with coming out as bisexual. I mentioned in the first podcast that I'm bi towards the end of the podcast, but I just came out in May of 23. And one of the things I started realizing as I was going through this journey was I was going through my life just being heteronormative, like just, I must be straight. Like, but in high school, I messed around with girls and I enjoyed it, but I never explored it because my mom always had a very negative reaction. She would be kind of silly about it. She would be like, oh, like, I'm totally cool if you're gay or whatever. But then she would be like, are you dating this person? And be like angry. And it like taught me like, oh, I can't, like, she's saying one thing, but she's doing something else. And it freaked me the fuck out.
So to kind of put that into a thing too, which I don't like this. I will say it. I don't want to say it. But so basically my dad was an asshole. He was a piece of shit to some degrees. And he told me that if I ever were to bring a black girl home, he would disown me. And so it's like, really now, like that's not something that like I'm not okay with that. Like I'm not cool
Right.
with that at all. Like that's why. Because the different color of their skin, like that's such a big
Bullshit.
fucking issue that you're gonna disown me for that. Like fuck that.
Yeah.
That's so stupid.
It,
So
it, no, you're right. And that's why we need to normalize this conversation because I never knew that about you.
yeah, it's like
And
he
I would have considered your dad overtly racist.
that's the thing. I mean, he doesn't make it clear, and that's the thing. He never did make it clear. It's not that my dad was, just all out racist, but he definitely did make it known that he disapproved of certain things, but it was only in the household. And it's like, what am I supposed to, how am I going to go out to my friends and say, oh, yeah, my dad doesn't let, this person come over because of their skin color? Like,
Right.
so yeah, it's like he didn't make it known. And I mean, it's the same thing. Like you knew my dad. So like you saw how he acted around you or around everybody, went to all the ROTC meets, how he was. Like my dad was a very sociable, personable person. When he was at home, he was not that. That was not at all
Yeah.
what he was. And it was just he was hiding everything behind a mask and wanted to look great in the community, but did not give a shit at home. And that in itself is just like a hard hitter right there. So yeah, like a lot of things that my dad said not to do, I never listened to him. I love everybody. So
I love that about you, and I think that's why we're still friends all these years later. I told a former therapist of mine when I first came out, that's who I first came out to. I was feeling conflicted because of similar reason, because we were all taught growing up because of media and society norms or your parents, because that's who teaches you, like this is the way things are. And for me, that's heteronormativity. That was, hey, you're just straight because everybody else is fucking straight. That's normal.
Yeah.
It's normal, a man and a woman. And that's what society taught us. And I told this therapist when I was coming out, I was like, I don't know that I can be bisexual or that I can be an advocate for the LGBTQ community. And she's like, well, why is that? And I'm like, well, because I used to think gay as being a choice and you choose who you're with. And one of my best friends came out in high school and I didn't believe her when she first told me. I'm like, oh, it's a phase, because that's what we're fucking taught.
yeah.
Just like you were taught, don't bring a black person home. You easily could have walked away and be like, okay, I'm just not going to bring a black person home because
Right.
that's what I'm being taught. But when I started questioning that, and when I started living my adult life and realizing over time my view on the LGBTQ community changed, because I realized it's not a choice and that's how people are. And it was becoming more normalized to see those types of people in our community. Columbus, Ohio is considered pretty gay friendly. I was like, oh, like that's who you are. That's your internal being, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans. Like you are presenting yourself in the way that you feel right. Just similar to skin color. You can't change your fucking skin color.
Right.
If you're fucking gay, you're fucking gay.
Yeah.
And I told my therapist at the time, I was like, well, I can't be an advocate and I can't be bisexual because I used to think negatively about those types of people. And one of the things she said that was very enlightening for me is that, but both sides of the coin. You know what it's like to be accepting and not accepting. And that can help convince other people it's okay to be different. It's okay to be yourself. It's okay to change the way society is telling us to be, because the societal norms of 15 years ago isn't necessarily the case now.
Well, see, that's why this is just like a my thought process thing, but this is why I say, the old saying, get with the times. That didn't happen until us millennials grew up, because those boomers were not getting with the times. They were not going to do it. And now you are seeing a new normal, which is everybody being able to come out and be themselves and being able to do their own thing. And everybody, is honestly being more open about, themselves. That's not something, like you said, 15 years ago wasn't like that. So it wasn't until us millennials grew up and said, okay, well, enough is enough with the boomer nonsense. So we're going to go ahead and, roll these things out now. And so now that is what it is. Us millennials are the product of rolling things out for the road of the future of generations to come to be able to take on, who they want to be as a person.
I love that you said that for a couple reasons. First of all, that's why we're having this conversation, and that's why this podcast exists. It's sensitive and we need to normalize it. And I agree and disagree with you for a couple reasons. Millennials are paving the path to being more open, more expressive, to being yourself. Generally, boomers grew up in an age, talking about emotional neglect, they grew up in an age where they were parented different and their viewpoint on life is different. However, and I volunteer with the American Red Cross. Most of those folks are retiree age. They're in their 60s, 70s. And I always joke with people, I have a bunch of 60, 70-year-old friends, and it's weird in the sense that I am unfortunately going to go through a phase of my life where I'm going to lose a lot of my friends because they're older. And when I say friends, I'm like, these people have my back. Like we're tight.
Right.
And some of them have been the most open, expressive, great mentors, but we don't always agree or see eye to eye. Some of them are very progressive. My friend Linda in Wisconsin. Hey, Linda. She's so open and progressive and I love it. And she's in her 70s and she's super active. And I swear to God, she's a mini millennial in there. But others I know are overtly just the way they were raised. They are in their habits and in their patterns, and that's not going to change overnight.
Right. I mean, thinking about that on like a scale, like think about, in the entire world, the number of gay people that are out there.
Sure.
That percentage number is probably what, like 3, 4, maybe 5% of the entire world.
Very small.
So that's the same thing. Apply that to the boomers. So you've got your boomer friends that are in that very small percentage of not, the same thinking of a normal,
Sure.
boomer that grew up the way they did. Some obviously do have their ways of changing and being able to get with the times, as we're saying. But then the other ones, which is like, I think the bigger percentage is what I'm, I guess, getting at, of boomers is, not getting with the times.
Yeah.
So.
And here's my argument with that. I'm not here to convince anybody to change their mind. I'm here to help people understand.
Exactly.
And I think that's the difference.
Exactly.
That some people, especially with the political climate, is the goal shouldn't ever be to convince somebody to see exactly eye to eye. I don't want you to think like me.
Right.
The world would not be what it is if you did. But if we can understand each other, even when we disagree, and amicably have a conversation like we are now. I just told you I fucking disagree with you. You didn't come throw me down.
Oh, no. I mean, you got to be able to agree to either agree to disagree or just understand that if you don't agree with something, that it doesn't matter. That's not for you to choose. Your choices are your choices, just like your choices are your choices. Mine are mine, yours are yours. So I might not agree with you, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to sit here and bash on you or hate you. And I say this big time talking politically because I, do miss the times back when political topics were more well, yeah. So it's like, I didn't know what you believed in. You didn't know what I believed in.
Yeah.
You didn't know if I supported this president or that president or these, topics, whatever. Everybody's political views were to themselves and kept that way. And it's like, I kind of wish we went back to that because for me, I'm a center right-leaning person. I would say I'm very much in the middle, but more right-leaning. I do have a lot of friends that are, either center-left or full-on left. I don't have a problem with anybody. Your political views are yours, just like mine are mine. It's not going to make me change how I feel about you. You support who you support. It's how you feel. But the only thing that makes me care about you as a person is how you carry yourself as a person.
Absolutely. And I think a good point with that kind of ties back into that mental health discussion and addiction is something I've noticed and I've talked to people about is there's this push towards extremism, extreme left, extreme right. You have to be one or the other and there's no center. And the reality is there's a lot of center. There's nobody that agrees 100% with any politician or whatever thing. But just like whether it's eating, alcohol, mental health medication, you have to find a balance and not go way too far to one end or the other. If we're talking about eating, you don't want to overeat to the point you feel so gross that you need to vomit, but you don't want to undereat to the point that you're starving yourself. Same with alcohol. Like, I hate saying this phrase because I need a better version, but everything in moderation in every part of life is so important.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, definitely in moderation. I'm learning that big time. That is a huge one for me. But yeah, I mean, it's just trying to figure out that balance, with yourself, and how you carry yourself is what really matters ultimately. It doesn't matter who you believe in, what you believe in. who you follow. As long as you carry yourself as a solid human being, then at the end of the day, I guarantee me and you will get along.
I appreciate that. You know, we were talking a little bit earlier about PTSD and recent experiences and how that presents itself. You know, you had mentioned a little bit, you just went through an experience like just yesterday that you wanted to share that I found very interesting because it actually had to do with teeth out of all things, which
Yeah.
is a little bit different.
Yeah. So I actually have been trying to break traumatic experiences or come with what is it? What's the term for overcoming trauma? There's like a special term for it, I think.
Trauma
But
growth?
maybe, but yeah, it's like trying to get over the fear of stuff. So it's like somebody has a fear of spiders. It's like you kind of slowly
Oh,
start
yeah.
introducing them to them
I
or
don't know the
whatever.
bougie term for
So,
that.
okay, so then yeah, well, then we're just gonna stick with learning from our traumas or trying to break traumas. Trying to have a breakthrough with my
Break
trauma.
the cycle.
Yeah, so about 13 years ago, give or take, I actually had a root canal done on my teeth or on one of my front teeth. Back when I was in 5th grade, I slipped and fell on the floor, busted my teeth out. That's the short story. So, anyways, years later, I ended up having to get a root canal on one of my front teeth. And when I had that done, I think I was like 16 or 17 at the time. And I was upside down in that chair for like a good 2 hours. And he
Jeez.
probably put about like 10 shots of Novocaine in the roof of my mouth,
Holy crap.
along with more shots of Novocaine in my gums. And even after all the Novocaine, I still felt every little bit
my
of
God.
everything that they were doing in there. Yeah. So it's like when he went to go drill the hole in my gums, when he went to go and vacuum the root out, I felt every bit of it, all of it.
No.
And then once it was finally done, they, sat me upright. I got up and walked to the bathroom and I collapsed on the fucking toilet. Like not sitting on the toilet. Like I went to go take a leak and I literally collapsed and fell like onto the toilet. My mom ended up having to come into the bathroom and pick me up. I went into shock and they put me on an oxygen tank,
Holy crap.
bring me back and everything. Yeah, it was really bad. And so it was just a very, very traumatic experience. And from that, I stopped going to the dentist for 13 years. When I was 18, I was supposed to get crowns on my 2 front teeth. And I never did because just of how traumatic that experience was that root
Yeah, that's
canal. So I
crazy.
was like, fuck that. I was like, I'll keep these temporaries for as long as they're in there.
I'll just be
And-
toothless.
Well, so my temporaries, actually lasted me like all the way up until now, and they didn't break or anything. I'm breaking traumas, and so I decided that okay, one of my biggest self-esteem issues that I've been having struggles with is my teeth. I want better teeth because I don't like the way my teeth look. So the only way I can do that is to break trauma, and so I actually went yesterday for my first round of getting crowns fitted and everything. I got my temporaries. They had to do 6 of them, which was the most I've ever sat for. It broke my record of 2, my teeth that I busted out. But I ended up getting canine to canine crowns. So here in about 3 weeks, I'll have my permanent crowns. And yesterday, sitting in that chair, I'll tell you what, I took a Klonopin before I went to the dentist, and I sat in that chair still full of anxiety, just riddled with anxiety, just riddled with the thoughts of, this is going to be bad. This is going to be awful. Like I'm just going to die here. Or I'm going to have to be put on an oxygen machine. Yeah. Like all these thoughts go through your head. It's like trying to break traumas. And it's like, you're sitting there, and me being the person that I am, can't sit still for shit. I'm literally sitting in this chair, like not being able to move because he's grinding down my teeth. And I'm just sitting there trying to embrace it. As I was saying, it's like with the anxiety thing, instead of trying to do the flight, I'm trying to embrace it, trying to welcome it so I can basically scare it off. So, afterwards though, when I went home, I felt the full effects. I couldn't fight the anxiety anymore. The anxiety, it won, and I went and laid in bed and I passed out because there was no way. It took so much out of me mentally and physically that the last thing that I wanted to do was be awake. And so, yeah, I just went to sleep, and just wanting people to know that it is possible to overcome those traumas. 13 years that I did not go to the dentist, that I did not take care of my teeth. I stopped going to the doctors for 12 years even. I stopped. Once I became an adult, it's like you were saying, it's like you're an adult, you can do what you want. I was an adult. I could do what I want. I didn't want to go to the doctors. I didn't want to go to the dentist. So I stopped, and eventually, it kind of took its toll on me, but, you always can change it. You always can change the outcome and provide something better. You just have to break the cycle and begin somewhere. For me, that's with my teeth. And I'm very happy to say now that by the end of this month, I will have brand new teeth finally. So that'll be one less thing about myself that that I dislike.
I'm super proud of you, Brian, because, well, one, your teeth look hella good right now.
Thanks. I appreciate it. They're only fake. They're acrylics. I got nails for teeth right now.
They're pretty, very pretty nails in your mouth.
If anybody wants to paint my teeth.
But I mean, I think the important thing you just said there is change. Change is so hard, but it happens all the time, and we're constantly going through it, whether we choose to or not.
Yes, and I will say I hate change. I hate the process of change, but I love the feeling at the end when that change finally breaks through and you have found this thing that you've needed your whole life. And, for me, it's overcoming so many things. So many things. I mean, I could talk about all the things that I've, seen, done, been through and everything. And it's a lot, it's a lot to take in. And you got to find that point where you say enough is enough.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting too about that, because we talked about in the first episode weight, and we talked about being overweight as well. And I mentioned it earlier about skinny and how that's a sensitive topic for you, because being underweight or the self-esteem related to that kind of stuff is important. It's just being overweight or being addicted to alcohol or drugs, like, are labels, right? But there's also the other end of the spectrum where it's just as sensitive to be underweight and be called skinny, or, to your point, your teeth was something with your self-esteem that was super important, that helps you feel more confident about yourself. And that doesn't mean that it defines you, but that was something that you did for yourself, which I admire, because sometimes building up your self-esteem, which mine sucks sometimes too. Like, I'm my own worst critic. It's just about doing the little stuff that brings you joy and brings you happiness, and just, again, in that moderation. If fixing your teeth, helps your self-esteem, helps you feel more confident, then go do that, right?
Absolutely. But you have to drive yourself. You have to want yourself to do it. More than you've ever wanted anything. I mean, seriously, it's a lot internally to go through the thoughts of, what it's going to take to overcome these things. And a lot of people, they look for overnight success or overnight changes or things to happen immediately. And as soon as you start looking that way, you're setting yourself up for failure. You have to kind of step back and look at things by the day. And when I say by the day, it's, as they say, one day at a time. It's one of those things. You literally take it one day at a time, and you don't sit there and say, oh, well, I'm getting close, or, oh, I'm one step closer. You go through the process and you embrace the process, and then you reach the end and you're like, holy shit, I'm done. That's it. I finished that.
Hell yeah. A phrase that comes to mind, and I forget who coined it or who said it, but it's choose your hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, being overweight's hard, but so is losing weight.
Yeah.
So which hard am I choosing, right?
Right.
I'm suffering from knee conditions and issues right now, with my meniscus, and I can deal with it being 310 pounds, or I can choose to change my lifestyle and see if I can lose weight in a healthy manner that maybe takes some pressure off that knee for physical reasons.
Yep.
I'm not wanting to lose weight anymore because I used to hate myself because I was overweight. Similar to how you said you sometimes, hate that you're underweight.
Yeah.
Because you just lose weight.
It's the same. I mean, and that's the thing too. It's with bullying is an all around thing. And so it's just as much as somebody doesn't like being called overweight, you don't like being called underweight. I don't like being called scrawny. I don't like being called skinny. I don't like being told that I need to put some weight on or that I need to, do a certain thing. It's okay, well, you're telling me the obvious. I already know this. I don't need your fucking input to tell me something that makes me already feel a certain way about myself.
Yep.
So yeah, it's for me, the problem is that I cannot put weight on, and I hate it. I would absolutely love to be at least, 20, 30 pounds heavier, but it's like, as soon as I put that weight on, if something happens, and this is where like mental health plays a huge role. If something happens mentally, if I have like a huge flare up of anxiety, I can drop 20 pounds in a month easily. And it's not even trying. It's just, that's what
Right.
happens. And it's something that I absolutely can't stand. But hopefully, if I'm anything like my dad and I'll hit 50 years old, my metabolism will slow all the way down and I'll just finally be able to gain the weight I want.
Yeah, no, I often joke with my friends who are skinnier than me, and they're like, "Oh, I want to gain weight." I'm like, "I'll give you a few extra pounds." If only it worked that way, right?
Yeah. But see, lighthearted jokes like that don't bother me. Like that's bonding in a way. I mean, that's like in a way a sense of bonding, because it's like saying like, oh yeah, well, I don't want this, you can have it, and it's like a ha ha ha. It's like, I'll take it. Like, but yeah, I mean, in the sense like, oh well, I wish I had that, or I wish I wasn't like this, or I
Yeah.
wish this. It's like saying those things like you don't know what you are talking about. You really genuinely don't. And the reason I want to say this to add to it, people that grow up fatherless, they say they wish they knew their father. They don't understand what they are saying when they say stuff like that, especially with somebody like me who comes from knowing my father, having my father in my life the whole time. And I'm sitting here in high school telling my mom she needs to divorce my dad. There's certain things too where it's like, I wish I didn't know my dad. A lot of my problems mentally would not be here if it wasn't for the fact that I didn't know my dad. So, it goes both ways, where you got to feel both sides of the spectrum. You got to understand fatherless, kids, that shit sucks. But it also sucks to have a father in your life that is abusive and that will tear you down every chance they get.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because that's somewhere where we contrast as well. We contrast in weight, but I also don't know my father, and you have. And reflecting on my life, there have been very few times where I've said I wish I knew my dad for similar reasons. Why you just said is that people would ask me like, "Oh, do you wish you knew your father?" Because I don't know his name. He's never been a part of my life. Like, I just grew up with my single mom, and a lot of times my answer was, I don't know, probably not. Because if he was a shitty ass person that he decided to not show up in my life in the first place, do I really want him
Didn't
in
need
there
him there in
now?
the first place. And
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's like, for me, I didn't need my dad there in the first place, but I didn't have a choice. So
Yeah.
I just say, it's like, be careful with what you say and what you wish for. And, it's one of those things where you got to understand life is completely different for everybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And understanding where people are coming from too, right? And I think that's where normalizing these conversations, talking about these sensitive topics are important, is because I couldn't understand where you're coming from unless I talked to you about it and unless we felt comfortable enough to be vulnerable about it. And
Exactly.
that's one of the big reasons I chose to start this podcast, was because I have very great conversations with amazing human beings, you being one of them, one of many. And I'm like, how do we have this conversation with everybody else? How do
Yeah.
we get people to be more confident having this conversation? And one of the realities is you have to have the tough conversation in order to normalize it, and in order to get to the point that it's okay to talk about.
Right. Yeah. And I'm glad that you do these podcasts too, because this is something that definitely does need more attention brought to it, more normalized, and something that can be more accepted, in the sense that we all can talk to each other about our problems and not think we're a bunch of crazies. I mean, that's not the case. It's the fact that we all went through something and that we all need help getting out of that thing. And at the end of the day, as long as you have that support, as you've been saying, then you're good as gold. You have to want it. That's the only other thing, is you have to want it and you have to work for it. You can't just have that overnight success mentality that will eat you up quicker than it will help you.
Absolutely. Choose your hard.
Yep.
So with that being said, I think I that's a good kind of spin-off point. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us before we break for episode 2 here?
Um, I just say, follow your heart. Really, I've honestly been following my brain my whole life, and it's been working against me. And so now I've been following my heart, and ever since I've been following my heart, I've been, feeling a lot better. Granted, I still go through a lot, obviously, but those are the challenges that come with following your heart. The brain is I don't want to say a terrible thing, because it's not, but it is an evil thing at times, and it will tear you down, and then your heart's there to pick you back up at the end of the day. So just love. I mean, love more than you hate. Obviously, there's things that we do hate. Yeah, love. I mean, just take appreciation for the things you have, and instead of wanting the things that you want, enjoy the things you have.
Absolutely. Practicing that gratitude when we were talking about change earlier. I work with a program called Change Enthusiasm Global that really focuses on the emotions related to change. And gratitude is a pillar to that for a reason. There's studies that show that practicing gratitude mentally have an impact on how your brain chemistry works. And sometimes it's fucking hard being grateful some days.
Right.
I'm just so shitty in such a bad space. But sometimes just like reflecting on even the small and the big things, the people I have in my life, or the fact that I'm in this house that I'm in, renting it, or my freaking cat, or whatever, just being grateful in some way is important to just to remind you where you're at,
Yep.
reground yourself. Talking about following your heart, I did want to give you a shout out that Brian G is currently working on his business, Burning Desires. He actually did some work for me recently that looks pretty badass. He burned some wood for me, did some paint, and it's so professional and I love it. And I'm really excited to see what your future brings with your artwork, because you have such a talent, Brian, and that's you following your heart. And I am just like thrilled for you to see where this goes.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I definitely have quite a few business endeavors coming up this year that people can look forward to for sure. I won't announce anything. Obviously, the Wood Burning Desires is out. It's got its own website, woodburningdesires.com. You can check it out. Feel free to just browse or buy something or have something custom made. I do it all. The other thing that I'll say I'm working on is talking about normalizing, with the podcast and everything. I just want to also say that what I'm going to also be doing is writing an autobiography about my life, but I'm going to do it in the state of the mentally ill. So what it does is it's going to portray, it's not going to be like a normal biography or autobiography. What it is it's going to portray what mental illness looks like through, the span of the years, and it's going to show how mental illness can come out, and it's going to show how it can develop. So what you'll get to learn is my life completely through my brain. And it's going to be like one of the hardest things that I ever write. But I believe that an autobiography full of, somebody's thoughts through mental illness is something that needs to be put out there, because, it's like we were talking about, thinking about like thoughts of like suicide and stuff like that. You talk about stuff like that and people are like, oh, well, they're going to put me in an insane asylum. Like it's crazy. It's crazy to think about that kind of stuff. Like, oh man, that's not normal. That's not right. He shouldn't be thinking like that. This autobiography is going to have all of that in it. It is going to have all those things in it that are going to make you say like, God damn, like that's wrong. Like there's something wrong with him, seriously wrong with him. But all it is awareness. It is meant to be made into awareness. These are things that I have overcome. These are mental illnesses, challenges, things that I faced. So obviously it's something that I can recoup and go back to. But yeah, it's going to be a very heavy-hearted autobiography about my life.
Well, I tell you what, Brian, I cannot wait, and I'll be more than happy to have you back on the podcast again when you go to release it, so we can really share some of that perspective, because you showed me just a small little snippet of what that might look like. And I think it's a really raw form to normalize, to your point, mental health and just like our internal worlds. And I think it's important as we talk about reflecting on ourselves and our internal worlds is like to know like sometimes our internal worlds don't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me see. I'm going to try to find something because I have something in here that I've written down. And it's basically, it puts a lot into perspective with mental illness.
Absolutely. And, another topic we'll cover in a future episode will be traumatic growth, which is a fairly new mindset or field that's being studied and still has a lot of study to go. But I think when I look at you and I would absolutely say we're products of traumatic growth.
Yeah, we definitely are. But yeah, so it's like stuff, that comes from like a mental standpoint.
And this is a piece of writing that you said will be in your new autobiography.
No, this isn't I do a lot of writing. I try to do a lot of, what I do is I'll do inspirational writings. I will also write down a lot of what looks like mental illness. You know what I mean? Like it's basically bringing light to mental illness. Now, again, a lot of this stuff is for me. Obviously, I don't typically share it with everybody, but where'd it go? I know I had it in here.
And I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because I think writing is one of many tools in addition to gratitude is just writing for yourself for no particular reason, just to vent or to process or to journal, I think is important. Or, because, you tell your friends things, but when you're processing your own internal world, sometimes, it takes quite a bit to figure that out. And sometimes putting it on paper, even if it doesn't seem to make sense when you put it down, just helps your brain to categorize that and look at it in a different way. And I found it very helpful in my journey as I've done some mood tracking and journaling, I look back and I was like, I forget how much I've changed. And I look back and I was like, holy shit, I wrote this like 2 months ago. I'm a completely different person.
Yeah. So this is just kind of put it in perspective, like what, a mental illness writing can look like. And so this would be like kind of something to expect in the autobiography kind of thing. So it's the coming and going of already knowing you're at a loss, but what is your focus? A true test of time, the plot to the crime committed. Are you going to steal yours and take what's mine? It's what's been dealt to me a dozen times. The aftermath will have you bringing a toaster in the bath. And so, yeah, it's just stuff like that. It tells you that things are a little dark and scary, but it's going to be okay.
You're on the other side of that.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, I absolutely appreciate you bringing your full authentic self with me today. I hope, whoever's listening to episode 2, woot woot, that you maybe took something from what we talked about today. We've touched on everything from alcoholism, addiction, drugs, overeating, PTSD, we talked a little bit about the political spectrum in there too, and just being real human beings. And I think, maybe there was a little bit of something that might help you through your day. As always, we're open to feedback and new content ideas. I'm really excited to say coming up, we actually have some pelvic health discussions. I know from both a women's point of view, but also men's point of view, pelvic health is something that definitely doesn't get talked about a whole lot. And we have actually a couple experienced experts, but also we hopefully will be having a physical therapist, pelvic floor physical therapist on with us as well. So very excited.
I'm looking forward to what you got coming up.
I appreciate you, Brian. So that's all for today. This has been episode 2 of It's Sensitive, and we'll catch you guys on the flip side. Go normalize some things.
Take care of yourself.